This is the Nonfiction Authors Panel. I'm Karen Nesius-Rager. I work here at Eckhart, and my job is to introduce them, and I've got some questions to get them started, but really it's all the questions you guys want to ask. This is your opportunity, so even when you know them well. So we have John Gramling, who is Chad Gramling. Where did I get John?
You're looking at John.
I'm looking at John Chalmers, and I'm telling you about Chad.
I did the same thing.
I
did the same thing to somebody else today. So.
Obviously, I'm competent.
I just take two.
Yeah. John Chalmers is on the end. John is a retired electrical engineer who's very involved with lots of things in the city of Auburn and has a book on healthy eating and repairing your gut. Yes. Okay, and Chad Gramling works for Three Rivers Credit Union and business development.
Business intelligence.
Business intelligence. And he has a number of books on local history, places in Auburn, baseball in Fort Wayne, and other such things. Barbara Lennox-Morrow is an Auburn resident. She's a journalist by training. She's written a number of nonfiction and some kids' books, and she has a new one coming out soon. And the daughter of her book subjects is here with us today, Ellen. Craig Burt knows more about railroads in Indiana probably than most anybody I've ever met.
There you are.
And they are fascinating stories, and when you know where to look, you know what you're seeing. If you've ever traveled Lima Road north out of Fort Wayne and seen the little brick buildings that are in front of the Allen County Youth Services Bureau and the former Irene Byron and wonder why the heck are there little brick buildings here? Because there used to be a railroad there. Read Craig's book and I learned that. And Greg Vick is a retired teacher who writes about running and where God shows up in strange spots like that. So I am going to turn the microphone, and my first questions will just be for everybody. So I'm going to let you pass the microphone. If it's not something you want to ask, feel free to pass it on to the next person. And I will tell you, they have had a look at some of the questions, but not all of the questions, because this is not a pop quiz, so we didn't want anybody feeling like, where did that come from? Also didn't want anybody writing out answers, because yes, one of my coworkers did have an author saying, do you want me to write out answers ahead of time? Only if it makes you far more comfortable. Not on my account. Yeah. So we'll start with something basic. It's nonfiction. How do you pick the topics you write about?
In my case, I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities to have quite a number of experiences, things that I didn't foresee, and so my books are about my own personal stories, and so I kind of relate to those. Some of my books, I've got short little snippets and short little chapters of life that's taken place for me. All of the titles of my books are what I call ING. The first one is, mastering the moments, which is something we're all trying to do. Master all the moments of life as they go along. The second two books are faith-based, running with God. So if you're into faith, then when I run with the good Lord, yeah. And I run solo myself. But it's also another ING. You're in the process of doing that. And then my third book, Trusting God's Plans, I look back on my life and I said, well, I kind of, got these intuitions and nudges and why don't you try this? And really, you want me to do this? And so anyway, I had to trust and risk and trust and kind of change, and things kind of worked out. So my books are personal stories, and over my lifetime, basically.
Thanks, I'm Craig. I pick things of personal interest, and sometimes I get those ideas from other people, but if you're not interested in it, you're not going to write about it. So, personal interest.
Hi, I'm Barb Olenek-Morrow, and I would echo what you just said, Craig, because it has to be something that interests you. Of my 7 books, the 7th soon to come out, they all have to do with history. So I'm very interested in history. I like biography. So that's 6 out of my 7 have dealt with history or someone's life. And when I do talks in schools, I usually encourage kids, write what you're interested in, but I find stories in my own backyard. Now, I mean that in a sense of maybe not so literal, my own backyard on Midway Drive, but my broader community, my town, my state, things that are nearby that that I want to know more about, but also that I think are stories that are often overlooked. So every one of my books I can make a connection to something, has a tie-in to Indiana.
Hi, my name's Chad Gramling. Barb stole my answer. I often tell people, like, my topics pick me. It's never something I'm going out and looking for. The first book I did was about the history of baseball in Fort Wayne, and I really did that to span all of Northeast Indiana. That came about as an opportunity I wasn't even seeking, and quite honestly, it led to hey, you've got 4 months to write this book. That was probably the most stressful, fun thing that I've ever done. Then the opportunity came about to write about Auburn, Indiana history, and I took that opportunity. The book I self-published called Listen Up Kids was a letter that I was writing to my daughters, and it became my opportunity to learn about self-publishing. And the book I'm writing right now it's still historical in nature, and it's still but it's actually fiction. It's a historical fiction, and it's a book based on an event that happened in 1908 Fort Wayne, an event that I learned about when I was writing my first book in 2007. And it stuck with me this whole time, and I want to tell the story. So it was just a great opportunity. So, John?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm John Chalmers, and my book is a health-related book called Answers from the Gut. And by the way, my background is engineering, and statistics, and technical. And I started writing as a technical writer of digital electronic systems. And then I ended up writing papers on statistics and statistical applications. So writing a book was a quantum leap for me, because I was writing on a topic of health. So probably the hardest thing for me was just writing in a different style, completely different style. But in each one of those things that you're familiar with, you know a lot about, are good topics to write about. And Answers from the Gut starts with me and my long health history, which hasn't been so good, and what I learned along the way. And, for example, I've overcome hay fever and asthma without medication. And I wanted to share some of the stories in the book. So it's from personal experience.
You can keep the microphone there, and I will up my voice here. So many people imagine that authors have these book-lined, quiet studies that they write in. I'm curious, what does your writing space look like? And is it always one space? No.
Well, mine's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
That's my wife. Okay, mine is a combined office and hobby area. I'm an amateur radio operator. I operate mostly Morse code, to stations all over the world. And I put my headphones on and tune to a frequency, and I write and I do different projects. But I got too many irons in the fire right now, and I can't find anything because it's somewhere in the pile. But anyway, out of that disorganized chaos, I do keep files on the computer, so those I can find. And I try to keep as much on the computer when I'm writing as I can, so I can find the files and keep track of it. So in a way, I'm kind of semi-organized.
For me, and especially when we're doing fiction or nonfiction, sometimes the writing isn't actually what's taking the bulk of the work, it's the research. And keeping my notes somewhere, and keeping that information somewhere, and keeping that organized. So that's a tall challenge, and the writing itself actually becomes the fun part. It's the editing and all the other stuff that it begins to get kind of stressful. But I do a lot of my writing wherever I'm at. It may be I'm in a parking lot waiting for somebody to get done in the store, or I get early to work, so I just grab my phone and I'll start typing something out if the inspiration strikes. It could be something might ring a bell or resonate with me that's said here today, and I might start writing something down. So it's really wherever I'm at and the inspiration strikes, I try to write. Now, unfortunately, I was just talking to Greg about this earlier, is too often I'll be rummaging through a box and find something I wrote 12 years ago and think, gosh, why didn't I write that more? Or what was I thinking? So yeah, there's pros and cons, but it's really wherever inspiration strikes.
Well, I have an office in my home, and I like that term catastrophe because I can often think a tornado has gone through here. In fact, maybe Ellen can testify to that because she's been over a couple days this week. We've been working. I like to say it's organized chaos because I usually can get my hands on everything, but while I'm in the midst of a book project, I like to have everything around me. Now I try to kind of keep it semi-organized, but as Ellen could testify to, right now I have papers laid out all over the floor of my office. You know, I've got the different piles, and I know this is in this pile, this is in this pile, this is in this pile. So I know where to find it, but I need more space, although maybe more space would be bad because, you know,
chaos.
yeah, but I know what's in the drawers and cabinets and what's on the bookshelves. In fact, I'm using another anecdote. Ellen wanted a book we had been working on, she had shared with me, and I knew right where to find it on my bookshelf. So it's like intuitively we know these things, but to anybody else walking in my office, it would look really bad. But then when I finish a book project, then I get a big tub or tubs, and then it all goes in there, and then I save it, and someday my kids are going to have to deal with it because I just can't bear to throw all that research out, so I hold on to it. But so that's how I write. Of course, there's a computer there. My files are all in the computer. I try to back up very regularly. And do I ever write out of my office? Like if I'm on an airplane or on a trip and I've got some time, then yeah, I'll take out paper. And basically I'm writing outlines, I'm writing notes. I know I can't do like a finished product or exact sentences as I want it, but I can sketch out, this is what it's gonna say. And it's amazing sometimes. I've found that if I am on a plane and I just let my mind go and relax, I can really outline and sketch something out pretty well so that when I get back home and sit in front of my computer, I save the notes and I thought, oh, it's all here, and I let it run. So I let it go both ways, but I'm at the point now that to make it polished the way I want it, I have to be on the computer to do it.
Thanks. Yeah, so I've got a room that's dedicated to storage of historic files. Everything is in legal size plastic egg crates, and the folders are set up and everything is perfectly organized. Official documents, unofficial photos, those are in floor to ceiling racks, and that is all precise and perfect. Then next to that is a room where I do all my typing and editing and everything. And like theirs, it's a disaster, but I can say that pile is where I have this and that pile is where I have that. And I know exactly where to go to get all that stuff, but only I know that. And you gotta keep it that way because somebody is gonna follow you, and when they look at it all, if you don't want it going in a 30-yard dumpster, you better be organized. So my storage room is precise, and my editing room is the same disaster as everybody else. Keep that room small and you'll be okay.
Well, I'm kind of like Chad. I carry around a notepad,
Yep.
pen or pencil all the time. I'm kind of old school. I write things down and thought or inspiration comes, and so I've got scraps of notes on napkins and little scraps of paper here and there. I do have an office space, and but I only go there when it's time to compute and put things on the computer. But the nice thing about always having a tablet close by is that, like I think Chad and somebody else mentioned, you can write anywhere. Thought hits and you're ready to write something down. So if I want to sit out on the back patio on the bench and look at the woods and so forth, and thoughts come and I can write right then, or I'm up at Pokagon State Park sitting in front of the fireplace in the wintertime, take my pad and I write along and so forth. So I know many writers will do their thoughts right on the computer. That doesn't work for me. I like to kind of take advantage of the inspirations when they come and write them down. When I go to the computer, then it's time to actually put it on officially and then work on the corrections and all that later on.
Some of you have alluded to this already, but do you start writing before you finish your research, or do you wait until the research is done and then begin the writing?
In my case, since all my books are about personal stories, when thoughts come, I've got to write. And some of those moments are 4 o'clock in the morning. I've been interrupted from sleep, and I said, oh, I got to get to my pad and pencil. And I've experimented with, well, I'll remember that in a couple hours, and it's gone. It's absolutely gone, and it's frustrating. So I said from that point on, especially when more than just thoughts are coming, where you got complete sentences. I mean, that's rare, but you say, oh, wow, this can go in a book for sure. I've got to go with that. So for me, when I need research, that'll come later.
Okay.
Now, that's a little different than what you hear from him, because I talked to him earlier. And so I don't interrupt any of my writing, any of my thoughts. We get those down on paper, and if I know I've got to do some research, then I'll put a little blank, or a question mark, or a star, or something to indicate I got to come back here and get some research on something, on a date, time, something with a calendar. But for me, research is second.
Yeah, so I start out, mine are conducive to doing a chronology, so I start out with a chronology. So when I start typing it, I'll have 1900, whatever, April 4th, 1900 in the subject, and then I have footnote. And that footnote has the source down to the final detail of what that is. And eventually I have a lot of that stuff and I can start organizing it to start writing. When I start writing a manuscript, I give it a subject title, Project A, then big letters, draft, and today's date. And I always, always, always keep the first draft that I did, because the next draft and the next draft and the next draft. And significantly, the book I most recently finished, I looked back at draft number 1, and it was exactly 2 days short of 20 years from when I started typing the manuscript. It's how long it takes sometimes, because you do research and you get done. I get to a point and I have to go back and do research. Then I get to a point and I go, I don't have that and I don't have that. So you're constantly going back and forth. So that's how I do all the manuscripts. So the answer is, yes, I start right away because I need to have those footnotes. I want precision in what I turn out. And if you don't have references all lined up and perfect, somebody's going to come along and go, where'd you get that? I don't know. That's the wrong answer.
Well, all my projects, even my one fiction book, I have to start with research. I have to read and read and read and learn and learn and learn. And then I, start getting kind of an outline for the story. Usually I have to go do some more research. And then I can start writing. But I know this is only preliminary writing. I know from once I start to put things down, that begs more questions, and I have to go back and dig a little deeper. So to me, it's then draft after draft after draft with more research coming in between all those layers. Again, I'm picking on Ellen here, but she can testify that I'm sure I drove her nuts on, all the drafts. And then I would go to Ellen and say, hey, let's together, because she's an excellent researcher, let's go dig a little deeper on this to get some more information to make this really solid. But it's also a discovery process. I love research, and I love that as part of the writing, because just what Chad's saying here is that you come upon something and you think, oh, this is super interesting. So maybe he'll include the little bit in what he's writing, but then it's in his head that this deserves more exploration later. And that so often happens as you're digging and discovering things. You said, this deserves a good story in and of itself. It's just I don't have time for it right now. But you get around to it if you live long enough.
I would say my process probably echoes what you just described, Barb, is if I'm not careful, I could research for years and decades and never actually write anything. For me, and it's when I find those things that fascinate me and start researching just the nature of who I am, I start to group things together and say, okay, is there a story here? Can this carry a chapter? Can this research carry a chapter? And at what point does it create an entire book? And to me, that's where it gets real fun. And to answer your question, the research is never done. It's never done, ever. It can, you might find something that totally changes the trajectory. It's really when you can start creating an outline from that research that I start really developing the story.
Well, mine's a little different than that. With the health issues that I was faced over the years in my life, and I tell a story in my book about when we lived down in Fort Wayne, about spending an awful lot of time in the Allen County Public Library. I went there every month. I was into the technical papers, and the big words, I couldn't really read them, but if I kind of breezed past them fast enough and kind of thought what was coming in, I get the idea anyway. But anyway, I was into the technical papers and the heavy duty research and so forth. But at that time, I didn't know I was going to write a book decades later. But over the years, and over the years, I've been researching this book. But I haven't been saving all the documentation and blah, blah, blah. Now, in my work was to solve problems, figure things out. Now, we manage people and we do other things, but there's issues that we face in our work environment, and we're to try to figure out how to do something better or whatever. So I always looked at it that whatever it is, it's got to work. So I wanted to have everything that I said in my fiction book be correct, and it's to the best of my belief the right thing. So I had, set up some criteria for myself in that research. But as I decided to start to write the book, part of it's biographical, so I started with that. And then to pick up the pieces, I had to go back and re-research. So that's kind of how mine worked.
I'm going to open it up. Anybody here have questions? I can bring the microphone to you so we can all hear them.
Bring
Yep.
the quarter
To go,
around
you
to me.
have to bring the microphone
Yeah.
this way.
There we go.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie. This is a self-serving personal kind of question. If any of you have dealt with perfectionism, how do you overcome that in your work? And sort of it's a two-part question, I guess. So if that doesn't apply to you, feel free to skip that. But I'm just curious, how do you overcome if you have a voice saying, well, what I'm writing isn't interesting enough for people to care about, or why would anybody want to read this? How do you overcome that if that is also something that applies to you?
Anybody?
Well, I'll confess.
It's good for the soul.
Well, I am a perfectionist.
Are you? I didn't know that.
And yes, but I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also a believer there cannot be paralysis. And that I am driven enough that if I commit to a project, I may be going slow, I may be nitpicking here and there, but this baby's gonna come to life. And so I think you have to kind of balance those things. So don't let the perfection just say, it's not gonna happen, I just have to let it die on the vine. I can't do that. So I'm glad that I have those dual things playing in my head. And then what was the second part? Because I had a reaction to that too.
Doubts of people being interested in your topic.
Yes. That can be a scary thing. Like, at the end of a day and you go to bed at night and you think, oh my God, I'm doing all this work and nobody's going to read it. And, that can be terrifying. And then you just have to wake up fresh in the morning and you get back into your project and, then I get so energized by it and I find it all so interesting. I'm a believer that I have to share my enthusiasm with others because then, I think just we as human beings, we can share our enthusiasm and other people can pick up on it. And, I can get interested in railroads here if I talk to Craig long enough, It just, and I can get interested in gut problems, by talking to John. So I think by virtue of being a writer and a reader, you just go forward and that doesn't hold you up.
On the perfection part, having been a school teacher and coach for 33 years at the high school here locally, you don't always get feedback. You just assume that you taught a good lesson and hopefully it stuck. And same thing with the coaching. And so somewhere along the line, I just came up with a philosophy of do your best and accept the rest. And the word best is a superlative, so there's nothing better than your best. So if I have researched as much as I can, I've put as much as I can into a story or a little snippet. Generally, I've got little snippets or short stories in my book, so they're quick reads. Chapter is usually a few pages. To answer the second part of the question, you're not sure if someone will like it. I think I do spend a lot of time on trying to have catchy titles of chapters or sections of chapters or the title of my books. And the 3 books I've done, as I said before, they all have an ing. So we're in the process of mastering, running, trusting. I hope that sometimes that what my titles are will at least be an eye catcher, at least get someone into something.
I'm a hardcore perfectionist. I am incapable of accommodating anything less. And the cost has been that I put in extraordinary hours. I can't do it. Sorry guys, I just can't be less. So when I get all done, and when you get done with your book, you're gonna see, I finished one and I did a book signing immediately thereafter at this little library, and this guy bought one. He sat down and started reading it in 20 minutes. After the first book sold, this guy says, I think you got a mistake here.
Oh,
And he was right. And of course, that's what you're trying to avoid when you're a perfectionist. So it isn't gonna work. But if you can compromise, well, you want to do that to some extent, but it's got to be accurate. You don't want anything less than accuracy. If I messed up the words a little bit, okay, I can live with that, but I'm not gonna compromise on accuracy. With respect to whether people like my book or not, I hope they do, but I am writing history and I want that history to be as close to perfect as possible, correct as possible, and that book to be available then for everybody to look at and say, aha, I see where he gets this, I see where he got that information, and to be able to use that for continuing research. That's my point. And again, I hope somebody likes it, but that's not the point. The point's to preserve the history of it all. Anybody else?
Talk, John.
Can you read the question again, make sure I stay on topic? Because these have been very interesting
Oh, I was
comments.
just asking about perfectionism and also how you overcome any self-doubt that people would be interested enough to read what you're writing.
Yeah, and there was self-doubt, and will people read it? You know, I thought about that an awful lot when I was writing the book. And by the way, in my health-related book, I've talked to many people over the years. And I'll have to be perfectly honest, the people I talked to, I would say by and large, after they heard what I had to say, they were all polite. But they were probably not really too interested in what I had to tell them when they got done. They've heard some other version or something this and something that, you know. And I thought, well, what's my real purpose in writing the book? And what am I trying to accomplish? Is it important to me to have tens of thousands and millions of copies sold? Or there's a certain level of self-satisfaction that I've achieved writing a book. And I have my thoughts and my ideas and my research is all now down in black and white. But I look at it, and my wife and I have talked about it a lot, in terms of the health. If I can help one person and their life becomes better for that, then I'm a success. And then once I have one, maybe there's going to be a second one. I had a person, and one of the things I can do is when I talk to people about health, I can say, hey, you can read my book and share. And I've got a case study in my book, by the way, or several case studies in my book. But I got a person that came up to me at Christmas Eve, came up to me, he says, my son read your book. He's in remission now for 2 years without medication. And am I looking to sell beyond the USA Today top 150 bestsellers? I'd like to be, but that was not an expectation.
Yeah, I'll just,
Go ahead.
if I can, I'll just add real quick. Mantra I try to live by is perfection is the enemy of progress. And it's real stressful to write a book about your hometown or about baseball history. I will tell you, people take that stuff serious. So a lot of when I find perfectionism is happening, it's because of an anxiety. And that's something I've learned about myself. And I try to overcome that. Will anybody read it? That's always a opportunity of self-doubt. And I will tell you, the last book I published is a book about saving money on your food costs. And I started that in 2017-ish. And I got really deep and I thought, man, this book's gonna be 1,000 pages. Nobody's gonna wanna read this. And I put it on the shelf. And then the pandemic hits. Store shelves are empty. Prices start going up. And I think, boy, now would be a good time to have that book out. So I quickly consolidated it down to the bare essentials and wrote it, and published it, self-published it, 2020. And I guess the point for me wasn't nobody's going to read it. This is valuable information that I went out there in the world. And if that's enough, that's enough.
Do we have other questions, other things that you would like to know from our panel? I've got more questions I can ask, but this is audience participation time.
I did have another question.
All right.
I don't know if I need the mic, but Well, I was just wondering if there are other nonfiction authors that you have looked to for inspiration or that you really find to be sort of at the top of the field.
All right.
Anyone?
Well, because I like history and currently dealing with World War II history, I'm really keen on Eric Larson, who can take history and make it so engaging. His book on Churchill, The Splendid and the Vile, and then I've followed a lot of other books by Eric Larson on sinking in the Lusitania and so forth. So if I find somebody good like that can really open my eyes to history and make it really engaging, then that's who I go for. Anybody else?
Yeah, I looked to a couple of different people. One of them was more of a mentor than anything. Not so much with subject matter, but what he did, he was looking at the very first manuscript I was working on. He goes, "You sound like a technical writer. That's not what these people want to see. It needs to flow. Write like you talk." Okay, so I'm not going to write like I talk because I'm not going to use contractions and things, but you get the picture. It's something that it's conversant. It's something that flows when you're writing. So that was a big benefit to me to get away from the trying to write these short, snubby little sentences and everything. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. The other thing, I insist on having when I get to a certain point where I'm pretty satisfied with the product. And not all done, but getting close to it. And so I do a draft and double space it and I give it out. I give it to people who understand things like grammar, English, that sort of stuff. I want to get their input on how well I'm writing that in that sense. And then I give it out to two different groups of people. One who doesn't know anything about it, and the other one who knows a lot about it. And I need both of those feedbacks because if I'm writing something that I want everybody to understand and people are going, "What's he saying?" then it's not written right. So I give it to people that don't know what I'm talking about and say, "What do you think of this?" And they'll come back and say, "This really isn't very clear and that's not clear." And then the people that do know the subject, they know the technique or the technical aspects of it and they can correct me on that stuff. So that's how I do things. It's that iterative process, and that's how I've learned how to do them.
Yep,
Oh, sorry.
Fingers down there.
I'll be very honest, not a lot come to mind. A lot of what I read is topical. So whatever I'm working on at the time, it's not necessarily I seek out an author, it's who's the expert in that field and start seeking them. If I had to name names, I love to read Malcolm Gladwell's stuff. Anything Michael Lewis does is great. But again, it's really who's pertinent at the time, not a specific author or writer.
Any other audience questions? All right. So one other question I had, and there again, this is something you've alluded to a little bit. Is research the price you pay for getting to write the book? Or is research the fun part and the writing is what you do because you have to do something with all that research?
Now, I kind of alluded in my situation, writing is number one, and the research is number two, just because I'm doing stories of my own personal life, memoirs, and so forth. The research is a little bit of the grunt work for me. Not quite as much fun as it is for some of the others. But I know it's necessary, and I want the book to have accuracy. So there's some times when, I look back and I thought, okay, such and such happened. Like, for example, one of the stories in my latest book is I was a part of the first draft lottery. So we got a little history there for some of you. And for the younger people, study that part of history. It's pretty dramatic, especially when you get a low draft number.
Yeah.
That had potential to totally change my life at that moment. And finish school, not finish school, get married, not get married, summer job. And this was coming right out of college, and of course, I wouldn't be here today if certain things happened. But anyway, so getting the exact time when that was, I had to research that and cross-check and make sure I had, when the government made the decision and drew the lottery numbers and get that right, and some other things in the book too. So research is important. It's grunt work for me, but I appreciate having accuracy in the book.
Yeah, I love research, and it's not the end of it, of course. I intend to do something with it, but it's an iterative process. I mentioned before, you start writing and you go, darn it, I'm missing that, and I don't know what I'm talking about here. So it's research, right for me, but I definitely enjoy the research the most.
Well, I love the research, but I would say it's 50-50. I love the research, and then I start writing, and then I'm in my real happy spot when I'm writing away. But the research, what makes it so fun is, and I think you've indicated, we've spoken, for example, on the book soon to be released, World War II, I learned that, speaking of draft, so I'm going to play off of your story, the person who was in charge of the selective service around World War II and through the Vietnam era, so this guy was on you, was Louis Hershey, okay? And lo and behold, Louis Hershey was born in Steuben County, just north of the DeKalb County line, okay? And if you've been to Trine, there's Hershey Hall, okay? So, to me, I'm not sure Ellen got as excited as I did, but I just said, I've got to work this into the book because he also is born around the time of, he's about 7 years older than Ellen's dad. But he's handling the whole draft when the time, everybody's going into the war in World War II, and then up through, he's reviled by the Vietnam era. So that's just a little detail that, I loved the local connection, and I had to read about him, and I had to work it in. Another example, Ellen's dad, when he's become an officer, he's sent down to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, where he's now, helping train, get the troops in shape, because they'll soon all be shipped overseas. And he's riding home. Again, we're getting this from the letters, but it's hot in Mississippi, training, 102-degree heat or whatever during the day. And one of the early casualties, while he's there that summer, he writes his parents and said, an Indiana person died. And we did some research. He doesn't give the name in the letter, but Ellen and I were able to find him. But he was from Elmer Dunham from Flora, Indiana. And I don't know, that's a touching story. But here's a young man from Indiana training at Camp Shelby, and these kind of things are happening all over. So I get caught up in the research, and whenever I can spin off and somehow just with a thread bring it into the manuscript, what I'm working on, I like to do it.
Again, Barbara stole my answer. For me, I would never call the research the price. For me, the research is one of the rewards. And for all I know, I've probably spent more money on research than I have made in the books I've published, for all I know. That's what I enjoy the most. That's one of the things I always like to know why. And I like to help people understand why, how we got to where we are, why are things the way they are. I just enjoy that sort of thing. And if I can take that research and parlay it into helping some understanding and go forward lessons, that's to me, it's one of the great joys of the process.
Well, I think back to my technical days when I did research, and technical things kind of add up, and you end up with a result, and you feel kind of comfortable. Then you go into the medical literature, and then you get conflicting. This study says this, and this study that, have you ever read in the newspaper, well, we got a new study that says this, and then a few weeks later, a new study says something different than that. And what are we? We're confused by all of that. And I'm trying to filter all of that mess out. And you know, try to get something that's truthful. And I found along the way, well, I can't go to the newspapers at all. In the subject matter. The technical papers, some of the technical papers are fine, but, you know, you get into like a swamp. You know, you're kind of stuck with your feet in the swamp and trying to find a way to get out of this swamp because you got all this myriad of information, and then stand back and look at it and say, what does it all really tell me? And that's, and I want to tell people facts. And to me, the facts that I read in the research ought to make sense with my experience. And if it doesn't make sense with my experience, then I have a real problem with it. So it's a real tug of war that goes on in the research. But I do want to, you know, I want to make another comment after I finished writing the book, and this is straying from the question if I can a little bit.
No.
One of my daughters said to me after I wrote the book, and I spent all this time on it, you know, writing, researching, and all of that. She says, Dad, she says, this could have been a nonfiction or a fiction book. You could have written a fiction book. You know, and that's been driving me nuts ever since, you know, because I could have taken my book and written a fiction book. Because the same people that don't believe the nonfiction version would probably believe the fiction version.
There you are. Very good.
I encourage you to write that.
Yeah. Exactly.
We have reached our 45 minutes. Imagine that. And I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank you for the patience because you are the last panel of the day. So you have had to do all of your public chatting with everybody who's come by your tables because I've been around. There's been foot traffic. I don't know if there's been as much as you were hoping for, but there has been foot traffic. And I appreciate your taking the time to talk with people. I hope some of them actually turned into book sales, not all just chit chat. But and I want to thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And you go down in history as being part of the first local author fair